Rand Paul didn't walk into that budget hearing looking to split hairs over a few numbers. He walked in with a mission to rip the cover off how government agencies demand billions from taxpayers without delivering accountability. The Department of Homeland Security came asking for a staggering $46 billion, and Paul was ready with receipts, calculators, and a blunt message: excuses won't cut it anymore. When you ask working Americans for that kind of money, you'd better show them where it's going. But what unfolded wasn't just about dollars, it was about a dangerous playbook of unchecked spending and surveillance that should alarm anyone who values both fiscal responsibility and civil liberties.
Everybody knows that's the end. We're going to try to move on to the next person to get you out of here. We talked a little bit about the wall earlier. The administration has asked for $46.5 billion for the wall. The border on the Mexican border is about 1,950 miles. We've fenced or walled about 700 of it. That leaves about 1,200 miles. There's 200 or 300 miles of it that probably never going to have a fence on. It's mountainous or just impossible to fence or wall. So I would say realistically, you got under 1,000. But let's just say there's 1,000. You really want to wall on 1,000. CBP says it's 6.5 million per mile. Your response today was 12 millions per mile. That means $12 billion for 1,000 miles. We're off here by a factor of 3 or 4 with 46 billion. Where's the rest of the 46 billion? The administration says they want 46 billion for a wall. You could pave all of it and still have, 34 billion left over. What's the 34 billion going for?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for the question. We do have 702 miles of wall today. 598 of that are steel. The rest of that is temporary, that's in place. Since the president's been in office, over 70 miles has been erected. We have 11 contracts that have gone out and allocated. We also have 5 more that are pending. Based on the dollars that have been requested, it's not just the infrastructure that would be built that would be the actual wall construction. It would be also surveillance equipment.
The number's way off. 1,000. You could do 1,000 miles for 12 billion. You're asking for 46 billion. So I'm one who's not impressed and would have to see more detail as to where the rest of the money goes. We can't just throw $30 billion out there and say things cost a lot.
I agree. We'll get you the specifics on that.
With regard to the drones and all the preparatory work that DHS does and the government does for the NFL and for FIFA, does the NFL pay DHS for the work you do?
Boy, not to my knowledge. I will.
Well, I mean, here's my point. The NFL makes billions of dollars. We're $2 trillion in the hole. I don't care if government shares their technology and government helps out the World Cup. They ought to pay.
Yeah,
people are paying hundreds of dollars for tickets. I mean, thousands of dollars for the NFL, for Super Bowl and things. They're also paying for FIFA. And so these people ought to pay. And so I'm one holding up these authorizations, and I'll let them go forward. But I want people to pay. I mean, it's ridiculous that the average taxpayer who could never afford to go to an NFL Super Bowl has got to pay for their security. Should the government help? If we have technology they don't, perhaps. But they ought to pay. So NFL, FIFA, I think they all ought to pay. And we'll be insisting on trying to put language in that. If you're a for-profit entity and the government's helping you, you ought to pay for it. With regard to TSA Quiet Skies and Tulsi Gabbard situation, I suspect there are going to be other people that were caught up in this thing as well. I'm horrified by the idea that we took a former congresswoman and we're surveilling her and riding on jets with her. There was another story of an air marshal whose wife, might have been at January 6th or something, and now we're, have air marshals following another air marshal or his wife. So I want to hear the whole story of what happened. I want to hear that people have been let go, that they're no longer doing this. If there were abuses of Tulsi Gabbard's liberties, I want to hear from that. But I want repercussions to come from this. And I think you've said something's coming. Please let us know, and let us know how the program the destruction of civil liberties can be minimized. I frankly probably have trouble with the whole program, but let's see if there's some way. But we need significant reform. If it needs legislation, please come to us with that. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Secretary Null, for being here.
The hearing began with what many thought was going to be a dry discussion about border wall funding. Instead, it quickly turned into a demolition job on DHS's math. Paul broke down the cost of building the wall in plain terms anyone could understand. Customs and Border Protection had long claimed the cost was about $6.5 million per mile. But DHS's testimony inflated that number, citing $12 million per mile. That might sound like bureaucratic rounding, but when you're talking about 1,000 miles, it adds up to billions. Billions that simply disappeared into vague justifications. Paul didn't let it slide. He pointed out that even if you built every feasible mile of wall at the higher estimate, it would come out to around $12 billion. Yet DHS was standing in front of the Senate demanding nearly 4 times that amount. Where's the rest of the $46 billion? Paul pressed. The room fell quiet, because the answer was as thin as the paper those budget requests were printed on. And this was just the beginning. Paul hammered home that you could pave every mile of the border, build walls where they made sense, and still have over $30 billion left untouched. $30 billion floating in a cloud of excuses about infrastructure, support services, and future contracts. But when pressed for specifics, DHS couldn't produce them. Paul made it clear he wasn't impressed. This wasn't an abstract squabble over accounting, it was about whether an agency could look Congress in the eye and justify taking nearly $50 billion taxpayer dollars without even a transparent breakdown. If you've ever looked at your paycheck and wondered why so much disappears before it reaches your pocket, this was the moment that question echoed through Capitol Hill. But Paul didn't stop at the wall. He shifted gears to an entirely different kind of waste, one that cut across party lines and went to the heart of fairness. He asked DHS a simple question: when you provide security for billion-dollar sports leagues like the NFL or FIFA, do they pay for it? The answer was no. DHS admitted that ordinary taxpayers foot the bill for Super Bowl security, for World Cup security, for events where ticket prices soar into the thousands and profits flow freely to private corporations. Paul's voice carried the outrage of millions of Americans who will never see the inside of a VIP suite at the Super Bowl yet still subsidize the safety of the billionaires who do. He painted the picture clearly: families struggling with grocery bills, workers paying higher taxes while their money ensures smooth operations for sports leagues raking in billions. They ought to pay, Paul insisted, and he was right. Why should an average taxpayer who could never afford a ticket bankroll the safety of events that generate record profits? It's an argument that resonates far beyond politics. Whether you love football or not, the injustice of billion-dollar entities leaning on taxpayers for protection is impossible to ignore. Paul vowed to hold up authorizations until language is added requiring private entities to pay their fair share. Because, as he bluntly put it, the government cannot keep writing blank checks for those already rolling in money. The symbolism here was powerful. If DHS can't justify the $46 billion for a wall, and if it shrugs off charging sports leagues for security, how much of its spending is truly for the people, and how much is for entrenched interests and unchecked expansion of power? But the most explosive part of the hearing didn't involve numbers at all. It was about surveillance, specifically, how DHS and its programs may be trampling civil liberties. Paul raised the case of Tulsi Gabbard, a former congresswoman who was reportedly surveilled under a program called Quiet Skies. According to reports, air marshals followed her on commercial flights, documenting her movements as if she were a suspect. Paul didn't mince words. If a former member of Congress can be tracked in secret without explanation, what hope does an ordinary citizen have? This wasn't oversight, this was overreach. And it sent a chilling message about how far government surveillance could stretch under the radar. The hearing dug even deeper, revealing that this wasn't an isolated case. Stories surfaced of an air marshal's wife allegedly being followed because of vague associations. Imagine that: an agency tasked with protecting passengers instead redirecting its resources to surveil the families of its own employees. The absurdity would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous. Paul made it clear that these weren't just bureaucratic hiccups. These were systemic abuses that demanded accountability. Programs like Quiet Skies were supposed to protect Americans, not turn them into unwitting targets. Paul's outrage grew as he emphasized the stakes. Surveillance abuses aren't minor errors, they're violations of the core liberties the government is supposed to defend. If Tulsi Gabbard can be shadowed, and if families of air marshals can be flagged, then anyone can be. Paul demanded answers on who approved these operations, whether people had been disciplined, and what reforms were coming. He warned that without immediate action, Congress would have to step in with legislation to shut down or reform these programs. The message was clear: unchecked surveillance has no place in a country that values freedom. By this point, the hearing had shifted from dollars to rights, from budget math to civil liberties. But the underlying theme remained the same: DHS operates with too little accountability, too much secrecy, and a dangerous willingness to push beyond its mandate. Whether it's billions unaccounted for in wall construction, taxpayers subsidizing billionaires' sports leagues, or Americans being shadowed on flights, the agency's actions reveal a pattern of entitlement and overreach. Paul was one of the few willing to call it out, and he didn't hold back. He framed it as more than just a Republican versus Democrat issue. This was about the principles of democracy, fairness, and transparency. If agencies can demand tens of billions without explaining where it's going, and if they can surveil citizens without oversight, then what limits exist at all? Paul's fiery questioning pulled back the curtain on practices that too often remain hidden in bureaucratic language and vague budget sheets. He forced DHS officials to confront uncomfortable truths and left viewers with a sobering realization: the problem isn't just waste, it's the steady erosion of accountability in government itself. As the hearing wound down, Paul's words hung heavy in the air. He reminded the panel, and the American people watching, that fiscal responsibility and civil liberties are not abstract ideals. They're the backbone of trust between citizens and their government. When agencies hide behind inflated numbers and secret programs, they betray that trust. And unless they are reined in, the cost won't just be measured in billions of dollars, it will be measured in freedoms lost. This wasn't just a budget hearing, it was a wake-up call. A warning that unless taxpayers demand transparency and lawmakers deliver it, DHS and agencies like it will continue to expand unchecked. Billions will vanish into bureaucratic black holes, while citizens unknowingly become subjects of surveillance. For every American who believes government should answer to the people, this was the moment to pay attention. So here's the question to take with you: if they can spend your money without telling you where it goes, and if they can track you without telling you why, then who's really in control? The answer depends on whether enough people demand change. If you're tired of seeing your money disappear into blank checks and your freedoms chipped away without explanation, this is your moment to push back. Hit that like button to let the algorithm know you want accountability. Subscribe for weekly breakdowns that tell the truth no matter who's in charge. And if you want to support fearless independent commentary that asks the questions others won't, consider joining us on Patreon. Together we can demand the transparency and accountability that every taxpayer and every citizen deserve.